Well, we are excited to carry on in our story in the book of Mark. And oftentimes in the book of Mark, and this may help you when you're studying the book, Mark will often put stories that are opposites together. In Juxtapo, they work actually in opposite ways. And so we've come off these high stories where God, through Jesus, has commanded the wind and the waves to settle down. He has commanded a legion of demons to leave a man alone, and that man was healed. He has raised a little girl from the dead. He has healed a woman who's been struggling and suffering for 12 years under doctor care and nothing getting better. So there's just been this powerful move that God is doing. And he says to the father of the young girl, there's this very key statement. He says, "Don't be afraid, just believe." And that's a crucial statement in the previous story, because I think what happens is this story launches us into a different direction. And you would think rationally that this wouldn't happen, but it does. So let's start the story in chapter 6 of book of Mark. Jesus left there, so he left what he was doing there at Jairus' house and the little girl that had been raised from the dead. He left there and he went to his hometown, which is Nazareth, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. So far, so good. Some very interesting things are happening. But then the questions start coming. Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles that he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's boy and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown, among his relatives, and in his own home." And he could do not many miracles there, except lay a hand on a few sick people and heal them. And even Jesus, it says in verse 6, Jesus was amazed at their lack of faith. So what you have here is you have this very sort of dynamic, small, micro story that I think is representative of the macro story. So let's dig into it a little bit. So Jesus goes home, and they knew about his miracles. They knew, what are these remarkable miracles that he's performing? So they knew about what he had been up to. They weren't left out of the loop or in the dark about what Jesus had been doing. They were also very amazed at his wisdom. And this wisdom that is used here is the wisdom that you get from being fearful of God. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. And so they recognized that there was something about him that was unique. And the wisdom was very much connected to, he was speaking very deep things from God's word. And it was really quite amazing to them. They were amazed. Really, that's a great word. They were amazed. And so they're amazed at his teaching. They're amazed at his wisdom. And then they start to pick it apart. And they start saying, well, yeah, but where did he get this from? And what are these miracles? And isn't this just a carpenter? Like, can a carpenter just do these things? And isn't this Mary's son? I always think that's quite an interesting take on Joseph and Mary, because isn't Jesus a carpenter? Like, isn't that his profession? And isn't Mary his mother? And so there's this unique sort of calling out of his parents. And some commentators think that that's actually kind of a derogatory way of speaking of Mary. They knew that, the whole story of Mary being pregnant outside of wedlock. And so maybe this was just dredging up the past, and maybe it was part of the reason why they had trouble believing. And his brothers, they weren't really his brothers. They were his half-brothers, James and Joseph and Judas and Simon. And most people think, well, James was the half-brother of Jesus. He wrote the book of James. He was the pastor of the big church there in Jerusalem after Pentecost came. And Jude, most people think that Jude was the author of the book of Jude. And so, his brothers, at least a couple of them, did come to believe. The rest we don't really know much about, and we really don't know anything about his half-sisters. And in any regard, they took offense at Jesus. And then Jesus makes this astounding word. A prophet is not without honor except in his own town and his relatives and in his own home. So he couldn't do many miracles there because people just had an unbelief. They had unbelief. He was amazed at their lack of faith. And a couple things. I think one is, like I said, I think this is a micro. This story demonstrates what's going to happen down the road to a whole nation. So what's happening not only in his family, because previously to this, a few chapters ago, his mother and his brothers and sisters came to get him because they thought he was out of his mind. So they were actively sort of working to against him, to bring him sort of down to their level. They were actively doing that. Even Mary was. And then now we see that the whole town, the synagogue had gathered in Nazareth, so basically the center of life, and the town of Nazareth had basically denounced him as, isn't this one of our kids? Why is he being so high and mighty on himself, and why is he doing all this stuff? And they rejected him. And so you see the larger picture here, that Jesus is going to be rejected by the whole nation of Israel eventually. But I think it's important for us to learn just from ourselves here that he was amazed at their lack of faith. As you read these stories and as you look at these things and you read them sort of from the perspective of, these are historical documents, and so this happened some time ago, we have to actually check our own hearts. Have we become so familiar with Jesus that we really don't see him as anything special? We just see him as the carpenter, or maybe we just see him as Joseph and James and John's brother, or Simon's brother, or maybe we just see him as Mary's kid. Like, there's this sort of way of being so way too close, way too familiar, you might say. And familiarity breeds contempt. So there's this idea that can happen in our relationship. And I think to fight against that, we need to weigh out, where am I in this? How do I view Jesus right now in my life? Am I drawing close to him? Am I seeing his power and his wisdom and who he is as attractive to me, and I'm growing, I'm leaning in towards him? Or am I pushing away from him? And that he would look at me and say, you read all these things, you hear about what I do, and yet you have no faith. And he was amazed at their lack of faith. In the story previous, he said to a man, don't be afraid, believe. And that man believed, and his daughter was raised from the dead. Wow. And then we have here, he just can't convince them to believe in him. And it's a very tragic story. And I see that, we can learn from this. And I can ask myself, hey, how is my faith? Do I trust Jesus? Do I look to him for my life? Am I leaning in? Am I looking to learn from him and not to judge him, or to put him down, or pull him down to my level, but to actually leave him as he actually is, the Son of the living God, and fully divine and fully human. And I just think it's a good way to kind of get yourself realigned to the majesty and the beauty of who Jesus is and what he calls us to in our lives. So God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.